Okay, I think we are live. Ashley, how are you?
I'm pretty good. This is live is scary, but I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. So I just sent out the final tweet there. We're going to give everyone a minute or two to come in, but I started doing these live Q&As when COVID happened because I really felt like a lot of people had questions and SEO struggles and needs, especially now that everyone was home and like dealing with all the changes that were happening. But I really wanted to start them up again and bring guests like yourself on to do the Q&A live with me, number one, because it got kind of lonely just talking by myself. But number two, I think you bring a lot of expertise and value beyond some of the more technical things or Google things than I even experience on a day-to-day basis. So basically, the way it's going to work is we want to take as many questions as possible. So in the live chat or maybe even on Twitter, feel free to just start asking questions. We're here to answer all your SEO questions about anything new in Google or strategy for 2021, etc. And I'm just going to hit record on Zoom too, just to make sure I do that. Let's see, record on the computer. Okay, don't crash. Yeah, we're here to answer all your questions. So ask them in the chat. And as people are kind of coming in and watching and starting to ask their questions, can you first just tell people a little bit about your background, what you do with DeepCrawl, but also I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience with Google, because I believe you're a top contributor there, correct?
Yeah, that name is always changing, and I haven't done much in the last year or two, so I always feel terrible talking about it. But the organization is really cool, and the other people. So I started doing SEO a while ago, a long time ago. I don't know. Time is a construct. But one of the ways that I got into it, I have an art history degree, but I started working for a company that had a lot of questions around XML sitemaps. And that was one of the first, I think Gmail and XML sitemaps are the first support forms Google had. And so I went and asked a question. And while waiting for an answer, I figured out how to answer a few questions myself to kill some time. And I just love that there was a community where it's people just asking and answering questions and figuring shit out on their own. So I stuck around. And that has turned into the Webmaster Central Help Forum. And so there are a lot of folks that just spend a lot of time in there answering questions, working with Google employees to try to get the right information out, et cetera. So that's the product expert side of it. Um, which has been super fun. And then I started doing just strictly SEO, in-house agency, all the things. And now I work for DeepCrawl, which is a software company. That, would you believe it? We have a crawler, DeepCrawl, and I am the director of the professional services team there. So I get to work with a team of the smartest technical SEOs out there, and that is what my day job is today.
And so with DeepCrawl, just to set up some context too, and I see actually, I think Brendan from Make SEO Simple again said hello in the chat. So thanks for saying hi. I guess he has a call with Alita. So enjoy your call with Alita. He has no question, but thanks for saying hello. Just for some more context, and then I'm actually going to start with some questions about. There's already some funny things happening in the chat. I'm going to start with some questions, unless other people jump in with questions. It looks like we're starting to get them. But just for context, are you like running audits for clients at DeepCrawl? Are you kind of doing consulting? Like, what exactly is your day-to-day work in terms of your SEO work at DeepCrawl?
Got it. So my SEO work is minimal. I do about 20% of my time really focused on the tech SEO now. I'm one of those folks that didn't sell out, but I built a team of people that are smarter than me. So my job is to remove obstacles and help empower them. The team in and of itself, though, we do some audits. A lot of it, though, is a lot of monitoring, a lot of solving tricky problems. It's not quite an agency model. It's a lot more casual. They act as extension of our clients' teams. So we become friends. We talk to their devs, to their CMOs, to their SEOs, and really thrive off people saying, I just don't think I can get this data. I want it, but I don't think I can get it. Or I have no clue what's going on. We like to solve both of those problems quite a bit.
Very cool. Well, it looks like we have our first question from Michael. So I'll read the question. And Ashley, I'm going to give you first kind of chance at answering. And if there's anything I have to add, we'll see what happens. But Michael wants to know, what are your thoughts on Google Passages? Is this a Google hint for us to write longer blog posts?
Hmm.
And I think he's
Uh,
referring to passage indexing, correct?
yes, yes, and them actually pulling certain passages to serve on queries versus the whole page. I don't think you need to write longer blog posts. I mean, that's my hot take. Who reads long blog posts? I'm sorry. There are some out there that are absolutely amazing. But for the most part, I don't think going for longevity versus brevity is important. I do think that finding the most complete answer and the most relevant content to put on a page, you're aces. But just the fact that Google can pull out what's most important in that passage to respond to a query, that's the cool part. But that's the technology part. I don't think your goal with writing or how you answer the question should change at all. And that's very much a softball philosophical answer. I don't know if you have a different take, Dan.
I do, but first, to set the context on that, I read that passage indexing is a ranking change. So doesn't that make that a bit of a confusing name, passage indexing? Or is it both? I mean, like that was an article, I believe, on maybe Search Engine Land or something like that, where they were saying passage indexing is a ranking change. And so I don't know if that's what you've seen as well. And then further, what that even means by a ranking change. Because my take on it was that it was almost like Google was going to be able to kind of find and identify maybe a piece of content and treat that as like an article in a way, and then kind of surface that as if maybe that would have been on a separate page or a separate piece of content, but now they're finding that within a larger piece of content.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they're identifying like a topic within a topic. That's kind of my take on it, my own interpretation. So I don't exactly know what they mean by a ranking change or if that article was even correct.
I really hate that they're using indexing with ranking, because we always knew that they were separate, right? You can crawl and not get indexed. You can be indexed and not rank. But it feels like this natural evolution where Google used to really rank a site. And then they were like, okay, lots of stuff happening. Let's look at page by page.
Yeah.
But now it's sections of pages, which I can see that being super useful. Like, what if you have a gem of content hidden among a lot of crap, a lot of muck? But maybe that's a good argument. So to Michael's question, maybe that's almost like focusing on smaller bits too. Like, it's fantastic if Google has the technical ability to find an answer that's really poignant and really authoritative in one page. But what if we didn't rely on that? What if we cleared out some of the craft in order to get that as well? So
and do you know if, and I'll get to I've got thoughts on the content length thing, but do you know if this has anything to do with featured snippets? Because I think a lot of people, even myself, when I first heard passage indexing, that kind of makes me visualize like the idea of a snippet of content. And I wonder if, and I don't think it has to do, but have you heard anything? Does this have to do with the idea of finding a featured snippet?
I would think so, right? Because you're going to be pulling that into the SERPs.
Yeah.
I think that Google wants to get people answers as quickly as possible. Yeah. So my question, if they're like, this paragraph is banging on this side or this one sentence, like, I'm going to show it in the SERPs.
Yeah. And my take on the length thing is I wouldn't create content any differently than you already are. That's sort of my take on length is one of my biggest pet peeves is when businesses want to pay writers by word count. It is such a bummer because it is completely not the right metric. It's not how you judge the value of what you're paying for content. Yeah. And I think I heard Ross Hudgens from Siege Media describe it as you should think about content density, which I think is a way better way to think about content length than word count, right? It's like
explain the content density.
Yeah, well, you can have 1,000 words and 50% of that can be fluff. It could be passive voice, run-on sentences, saying things over and over again, being redundant, like I am sometimes on podcasts. And that doesn't it's longer by word count, but there's not as much information packed into that, right? So it's about the density of information, I think, rather than thinking about word count, in my opinion. So I would agree, and I think Michael's question really applies to all content in general. Like, should you just artificially try to make your content longer? Of course not. You should make the content serve the purpose of the page.
I do think what you can do to your content, though, is just make sure it's structured really well with headers and almost has that question answer format, not just Q&A, but what's the purpose of a sentence, like going back to deconstructing paragraphs. Junior high with line charts and everything is, the purpose of what you're going to say or the goal, say it and then sum it up almost in a very concise way, because I do still think there's a lot to be said about really focusing on the structure of each paragraph. Does it have a point that's contributing the whole? Are we breaking out titles and subtitles? Something like that. It's basic stuff, but I can see that really helping with passages.
So, Michael said, thank you for the answer, by the way. So, I see there are definitely a handful of people viewing, which is awesome. We're going to continue chatting about things coming from Google and in the world of SEO. But as you have questions, definitely leave them in the chat. And then I'm going to try to make sure to remember to check Twitter as well for any questions. But while we're waiting for a next question, what does goldfish mean in the chat?
Yeah.
I'm lost on that.
I had remarked on like why I love short content, right? I like bullet points. Full sentences are tough.
Oh, the
And
attention span thing.
yeah, Michael's a saint and can read full paragraph. Like it has to be a very intentional, meaningful thing where I clear a space and read a long paragraph. So bless the academics and the saints and the thinkers that are reading those articles. They are amazing. I probably read like 5% of my reading is that long form. At least it's SEO related. That's interesting. I didn't think about it that way, but I read a lot of political articles that are much longer. But
just to dig into the content thing a little bit more, because the goldfish thing's interesting. I always think about if you're going to create content for search purposes, there's 3 types of visitors. One is the person that just scans headlines, maybe a couple other words. But that's why, to me, when I have people create content, it's really important to have very clear headlines that reiterate the topic of the piece of content. And then every heading to me should take the inverse of pyramid approach, meaning are you okay over there?
Sorry, I had recorked a kombucha, which had just popped the cork out. So I guess there's some really
These live
powerful
Q&As,
fermentation happening over
bring
here.
an element of danger to them. That
Jesus,
is true.
sorry. Continue on.
But every header you should take the reverse pyramid approach where you shouldn't bury the lead. So if you have a post that's like 7 tips for something, each header should have the punchline in it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So you get that first type of visitor. The second type of visitor is the one that scans the headers and then maybe bullet points, maybe looks at anchor links, maybe looks at what's in bold, etc. So you also need to think about making the content a layer deeper for that person. And then you've got that third person that's going to read every single word. So I think not enough content creators, especially for search, especially when I work with clients and they really don't have a lot of experience in that realm, are creating content with those 3 sort of personas in mind, which is quite important. So, well, we're waiting for another question. So I did want to chat a little bit about Core Web Vitals, and I actually had some unofficial questions come in from Twitter, just in chats I've had with people over the last week or two about Core Web Vitals. And Eric Mandel, he messaged me the other day, and this is basically his question. He says, I have a client asking for case studies on Core Web Vitals and how focusing on them might affect search results. I have done limited testing and understand the SEO community view is that it is too early to tell or inconclusive if these are or even accurate. But I am wondering if you know of any case studies or anecdotes or any data or metric points that might kind of prove his case or show that improving Core Web Vitals is actually helpful.
Yeah, so I'm probably one of the worst people for remembering the stats off the top of my head. But with Google, right, they have lots of the Think with Google. Sorry, that's the one domain I'm thinking of and I don't know how often they're producing fresh content here. There are some 2021, but thinkwithgoogle.com is great because they've got different business units from Google putting out data such as like, what happens when you decrease load time by half a second? What does that mean for conversions? I use Google a lot. There are some really robust data sources out there, like the Deloitte one is fantastic. Some of them cost money. This is free and it says from Google and people pay attention to that. And I get sick of fighting them on why they should trust metrics. But if I take it from Google directly, it's okay, all right. So that's the easiest possible way out. Our team has a ton of different metrics and resources. Jamie Indigo, who's on my team at DeepCrawl, has like a full resource. So I would be happy to tweet out some of my favorite, just at least data points on that, because there are a lot.
Yeah. And that you said think with Google. I still think, no pun intended, that a lot of people don't actually realize that all those data studies are there. It's like a really valuable resource.
Yeah, I don't do they talk about it anywhere? I don't know. I think it's a fantastic site. I'm there regularly, to be honest, but I don't know how often they promote it. But there are specific folks that are coming in from different businesses. They have consumer insights marketing, but that includes some data and measurement, programmatic stuff. I mean, they have a lot of stuff that's relevant to SEO and a lot of stuff that's relevant to content. And they also have it by country, which is amazing. So
Oh, wow.
what's relevant in the United States is not relevant to the rest of the world. And so you can go in there and they have, I think, like 15 or different countries. So you can go and target something in your region and get information or at least benchmark data that's truly relevant to you.
That's great. And then the other one you mentioned, but I think is paid, is at Deloitte, did you say?
Yeah, they have, God, they have amazing data. Um,
And so, in terms of Core Web Vitals, like, and I think Eric's question was great, and I sort of have another answer I want to circle back to in a moment. And by the way, if people are watching, feel free to leave questions in the chat or on Twitter. We're going to keep an eye on everything. And if nobody leaves questions, I've got a lot of questions, and we're going to chat maybe a little bit later as well about Google Discover, because I have some strategies there that have been really helping clients grow a lot of traffic from Google Discover and maybe web stories too a little bit. But getting back to Core Web Vitals, does this replace traditional page speed metrics like deferring off-screen images or render blocking resources or caching? Like, how exactly does the Core Web Vitals relate to those more traditional page speed metrics that we're all familiar with?
I don't think it should replace really any of them, but I think it should simplify, right? So I think of page speed as being this big boulder and we have to chip away at it with any tools that we have. Google's telling us that these four are most important, or these two, or these three, depending on where we are and what they're highlighting. And a lot of them, like cumulative layout shift, is a really good way of saying that there are 4 or 5 things that contribute to this happening, right? So it's a way of taking that information and making it much more accessible. Um, Most of the people we know and love in this world don't want to hear about DOM request size.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
People are interested in when you say, you know, that jankiness when you load a site and go to read and it bounces again. So I love the Core of Vitals. I think it makes it accessible. I think having like understanding what's field data versus lab data, having really clear numerical value metrics versus just a very nebulous, like this feels okay green. All of that is useful.
So
But
this is a way that Google is attempting to make it bring it closer to like the user and their experience, and then also that in a way helps communicate that to businesses and site owners better as well. That's, and like you said, instead of like, you know, caching, right, it brings it closer to something that touches upon what the user experience is.
yeah, maybe that's a good part of like then maybe that's a good part of how they really started naming some of the things is they've taken what we think of as more programmatic language like caching or like asynchronous loading or something like that. And they've started using language like, hey, when does your main content show? Or is there any jankiness that comes along or anything like that? Is it, you know, mobile friendly just so that we're thinking more in terms of the end experience versus how something's built?
And to improve the core Web Vital metrics, like you said, there's like, it's like rolling like 5 or 6 things into one metric, like cumulative layout shift or something like that. So aren't we, development wise and action item wise, aren't site owners still just doing the same improvements they've been doing all along, but now there's just this new way to measure it, right? So that would tie back to my thoughts for Eric's question about how do you measure this and show results. I mean, I would think in a way that you could, tell me if this is too big of a leap, but you could say, well, we know that past page speed improvements have improved conversion rate or some
Mm-hmm.
other on-page metric, and say sort of, well, Core Web Vitals is just another way we're referring to and calling page speed improvements or user speed improvements. Therefore, we can expect maybe conversion rate improvements or on-site metric improvements as well. Is that too much of a leap, do you think? Do we not have enough data there? Or is that actually maybe a possible way to communicate this?
Optimistic but not naive. I mean, if the data is already out there and Google's saying, hey, and other agencies are saying, hey, we know people like faster websites and buy more, fantastic. Is it going to be causal on a website? I don't know. Like, there's a lot going on there. I think the biggest question for most site owners and what they need to get a hold of SEOs is how are we measuring speed? How are we benchmarking and how are we improving it?
Right,
Because
right.
I know for me, I don't trust any single tool. I try to take averages and trends from at least 3 different tools over time. Uh, but I think that's more important is how are we benchmarking? How are we making improvements? How are we keeping the improvements? Because just, often enough, you'll make an improvement and then tech debt or what you needed or certain scripts that are loading, you're going to slide right back down. But if someone heralded as, hey, we got our page speed to an 80 out of 100, fantastic. But then no one looked again for 6 months. I mean, you could be screwed. So I think that find a way to calculate those metrics, find a way to stick a pin in a chart and see where you're going before you worry too much
I know a lot of
about.
people are using Search Console, right? Because you've got the native Core Web Vitals report in there. Um, I see your reaction to that,
I
right?
don't
So,
love that report. No.
right, it's
It's a
not
sample.
great. So, what should people be using maybe instead?
Yeah, John Mueller, how dare you?
Oh, hi,
He's
John.
commenting. So, A, hello, nice to see you again, sir. B, the Search Console data is a sample. So sometimes when you see like really dramatic flips, it just stresses people out, right? They're like, oh shit, like everything, my red and my green just flip flopped. But that may be based off just a fewer pages, right? A fewer representative templates, not the entire site. And it may be based off of, a threshold for a numerical score that's harder to see. So it's just really easy to hit the panic button there.
Right,
Um,
right. And so I think this
yeah,
ties into another unofficial question we had. And John, do you have a question? We'll be answering questions from John. I see a couple other maybe coming in, but another unofficial question that I got on Twitter the other day was Taryn said, I'm still trying to figure out how to not make gathering the URLs and info a huge task. Do I really have to download every single URL from the Core Web Vital numbers from Search Console? Or is there a better way to like manage, especially on a larger site? And even though it's sampled, I mean, you go in there sometimes and there's like hundreds or thousands of URLs. So I
yeah.
think your question is just like, how do you kind of get the data from Search Console or another place and turn that into something useful and actionable and manageable?
Yeah, if John's going to say Search Console for the win, I'm going to say update that API. Like, because that would help everyone so much. That's a really good question. Like, how do we look at speed as a whole? Um, I'm I'm lucky. I work for a crawler, and we
Yeah.
have Core Web Vitals built in, so we're able to generate. But it's lab data based off our own server stuff. So it's definitely not the exact same as Google, but ideally, what I'm looking for are the same trends.
Yeah.
Like that always has to be. That always has to be said. However, I'm able to see Core Web Vital metrics per page and then diff them over time. I think Screaming Frog does a really good job with this too. Like they're very accessible and they have some really cool page speed metrics built in. So that's a little easier. But if I'm not using APIs and I'm not using other third party tools and I'm just trying to use Search Console, uh, I think it's a little tricky, but I think that importing that data in Google Data Studio and using some of the connectors there would be a
Uh,
really great way to
and
start trending and seeing that.
I love that tip about getting it in Data Studio and looking at trends. That's really good. One thing I try to do, because I try to just find at least to begin with, the easiest, most approachable way to tackle something with a client. So I'll try to identify page types. So maybe they have like 5 templates on a CMS, right? And then look
Yeah.
at the worst offenders in that report and kind of assume that maybe they're going to see if they fix their page template, then it'll
Yeah.
fix the 2,000 pages on that template or something like that. So
Yeah. That's an excellent way to get really granular and have them target per template, which
yeah, I
would be a
mean,
very cool way for A to B testing too, right? If you're like, we really focused on updating this template, like let's see what happens over the next 3 months.
oh, I like that tip. Yeah, to A/B test. That goes back to Eric's question. So I do see what I think as well, and you thought is a really good question in the chat. So spinal cord. I don't know who the person's
The
full name is,
most
but
badass name
yeah.
in an SEO chat right now.
So Spinal Cord says, are there platforms that are inherently worse with Core Web Vitals? I agree. That's a great question. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've had a chance to think about that or experience anything there, but I'll let you go jump in first.
I have thoughts, but I also have a question I want to toss back and see if anyone has the answer to it. Because I had a client and I were talking about it last week and it was really intriguing. But my first thoughts are it's probably not as platform specific as it could be. Like for me, one of the big make or break things has to do with the JavaScript on a site, which can be very much independent and often you do with a lot of third party stuff there. And there's always this like Wix has done so much work on SEO improvements over the past couple of years that anytime, I like to use it as just a case study of anytime we really push too hard and say this platform's good or this platform's bad, I think we're really going to be missing a lot of great opportunities as a community. And we're probably going to be putting off some clients who may love and trust that technology. So
Yeah.
I love the question. I think it's really intriguing. I'm going to push back a little, like it depends on how you're building it out, what version you're using, how you're serving it. There's a lot of different ways to tool and retool stuff with performance. Now, the question I have that this is all right, I'm throwing it out there. Please, dear God, anyone that can answer this and give me some data would be amazing. But single page applications. So from a user perspective, they load wicked fast. Like I'm really happy with the ones that are built well, the ones that are clearly crawlable. Like single page apps seem to do really well for me. However, the ones that I've tested recently are showing really low on page speed insights. So is there any inherent risk to Core Web Vitals specific to single page applications? That's my question of the week. Do you know the answer, Dan?
I don't know the answer. I sort of have a slightly different answer to the spinal cords question about platforms. And I don't know of any platforms, but I do know when you get a really like weirdly done WordPress template, like some developer takes just a standard WordPress template and customizes it so much and adds a million plugins. That's what the common denominator is usually that I see making something really works for Web Vitals. It's like an over-engineered website. You know, it's using all these features and things that you don't need. Like you said, especially that depend upon JavaScript in many cases. That really hurt those metrics. The other big thing too is to think about, just for people trying to improve their core Web Vitals, is how this flows into the content team. Because I think a lot of this is technical, but also I worked with editorial teams to try to get them up to speed, no pun intended, on, you know, what are your best practices for image optimization before they get uploaded and hit the server, and then maybe still hit a compression tool, right? So like getting on both sides of the equation, because, you know, you can run a 5,000 pixel 3 gigabyte image through a compression tool, but that's only going to help you so much, right? It needs to also begin with some editorial training and processes to make sure when they're being uploaded that they're optimized as well to begin with.
Yeah, they should be aware of that, because I mean, it brings in an interesting point, because say for instance, like Google Passages, which people are going for now is text, what's generally being pulled into the SERPs, or what I think is being considered. I don't know as much about it, but we know that images are really important to publishing. Like you can't just write the good text. I mean, Bing has always done a pretty, like I always liked that Bing tried to take into consideration the whole page experience, videos, images. They wanted something really rich and robust versus, I believe, everything's opaque, cloak and dagger, that Google was more like, give me the content and the answer and a way to convert. I don't care as much about videos or really flashy images. But then we see Google Discover throwing some really great images there and standards on that. We see WebP, which is like some really fantastic way to like losslessly. That's a terrible word. To be able to compress images in a more scalable way. So yeah, I think that like keep nudging them to include images. Like that has to be important, but there probably has to be a general awareness. And is there a tool out there that just shows how well an image is compressed or served? Wouldn't that be
I don't know about how well it's compressed, but I always rely on just Screaming Frog and all images report and then image file size. The all images report, as opposed to the size report in Screaming Frog will show you where it's linked from. So that's just a little extra helpful that I find for clients. But what I've had some of the bigger enterprise sites that work on, like they have some really smart developers that can run their own custom built compression tool on their server, and then, you know, come back and say, okay, we ran this, then I'll run Screaming Frog again and catch anything that they may have missed or that's still too large. So I think it can be a little bit of teamwork too sometimes. Amalcor left a comment saying the question comes from being told we are maxed out due to being on a specific platform and really can't improve on scores in the 40s due to that. Thanks for the good discussion. Yeah, I mean, maxed out is tough. I mean, it depends, because, you know, Shopify, for example, does have more limitations. I mean, I think they're getting better, just like you said, Wix is getting better. But I do think Shopify, or even like Squarespace, you know, is a platform that has more limitations because you can't get to the back end. But I do think there's always, if they're saying you're maxed out, I would push back a little bit. I mean, there's always something I think a little bit more you can do. I mean, see if you've really used enough, caching, for example, or uh, delaying image loading, through lazy loading. I think there's always something a little bit more you can get out of a platform, unless you really are in one of these very self-serve, like Squarespace types of situations where you can't get to stuff.
Let's peer pressure them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because it's one of those answers where it, like, I understand where it's coming from technically, but it's a really unsatisfying answer. I have to imagine that if you're on that platform, other people are on that platform. And if it's important to users enough to incorporate it into a ranking algorithm for the biggest search engine in the world, then it's important for them to pay attention to. Um, so yeah, there are going to be restrictions. There's, like, I see a lot of clients that are like, hey, I know I have a lot of JavaScript firing, but I need all of it for business reasons. There are some ways you can get a little pushy and clever. A lot of these places, and especially a lot of scripts, businesses may have written an optimized version that's leaner, faster, asynchronous, something, and they don't tell you. They have it, but they're not like delivering it to your door. So sometimes just saying like, hey, this is wicked slow and I know it affects a lot of sites. Do you have an updated version, or would you be interested in developing one? We'd be happy to test.
Yeah.
They may already have some. So it's that big boulder. You got to chip away at it. But God, it really does there is a liability on webmasters with the platforms that they use. And that is unfortunate, but I also would like to think Google is taking that into consideration. A lot of what Google has spent time and money developing is compensating for things that are too technical for a lot of people to be able to fix, like things that do not enable small business owners to succeed. I don't think they want everyone to be programmers.
And we just had John Mueller himself in the chat say, yeah, if the platform is slow, push back on them. It's not always easy, but without pressure, it's hard for them to prioritize it. So it's not every day you get somebody from Google on your Q&A helping to answer questions. So I'll take it, John. Thanks for joining and participating.
He wants us to create a gripey coalition, which is honestly, it's pretty good. Like, let's go. You can use Built With and go see what other sites have that technology. And if you have a contact there, great, get them on too. But if not, like, let's create a pile of websites saying, man, here's some really big websites, big chunk of the web, all using you. Could we convince you to do a better job?
Yeah, I like that. Maybe somebody out there wants to start a spreadsheet or database or something of like different websites and different platforms and how they're performing. Be a cool study to do.
Yeah, I'm happy to be a gripey spokesperson, but not clever enough to do the work. So let me know where.
So I want to sidestep a little, because what we're getting into the territory of now is, in the big picture things, how important is core web vitals or page experience or these things like that? Because I do feel like, in a way, this might not be important for all businesses or all types of websites. I mean, if you're a florist, do you care about cumulative layout shift? Or are you really more focused on like Google My Business and Yelp, or things that are local oriented? As much as they can be in the day and age of COVID. And for example, and I didn't plan on John being in the chat, but I have an article from Search Engine Roundtable that took some bullet points from a talk that John gave, I think at SMX towards the end of 2020. And the bullet points are some things that John was saying are important for SEO in 2021. And there are things like core web vitals, being better with technical SEO, getting users to pull into your site with like brand searches, looking out for core updates, and things that are like structured data to be more visible in the SERPs and things like that. But when I read through this whole list, in my mind, I'm kind of going, okay, yeah, core web vitals, important. Technical SEO, important. Look out for core updates. Sure, that's all great. But the only thing in there, in my experience, that I view as like this really strong ranking signal, if we're just talking about ranking factors, if you will, is brand searches. I sort of think brand searches are one of these things that still, surprisingly, not a lot of SEOs talk about, but really contribute to, in my opinion, I think perhaps better rankings, better, if nothing else, a better view of like, hey, this site is authoritative because people want this website. And especially if you get like brand plus keyword, in a search query, that's even a stronger signal that this site is important to people for this keyword. So just putting core web vitals and all this stuff into context, let's say somebody like spinal cord, he was asking the question, is hammering away at the core web vitals, and he's getting things to like a 50, 60, 70. How much value is there going from like 80 to 90, or like these little incremental, changes in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah. I mean, I live in a pretty idealistic world when I'm like, it's important, all of it's important. But at the end of the day, if you only have, 5 coins and 7 things you need to buy, like you're going to have to adjust. So this may have been painfully obvious, but I'm not a marketer or a content writer or any of that. So some of that goes over my head. But I do tech SEO. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, you have to have a website that is fast and answers questions. So to me, it's probably more important. GMV for something local, like if I can go into a store, critical, right? That is definitely number one. But if it's something where I can buy online, and I am a snot about this, but if I end up on a bumbly, slow site, in my mind, there's always somebody else that can offer that to me. You're not, in most cases, you're not unique, right? So like looking for a florist, which I did recently for, to send some flowers to someone, I hit 4 sites, probably within like 12 seconds, and ordered from the one that was fastest and cleanest, just to make it quickly.
Have you ever shopped with Domain Authority?
I'm glad the rest of the world doesn't operate like I do, but it's just there's so many sites that can offer it and do the same capabilities. They're probably all getting their flowers from the same person in that town, but that's something where if I can find it in a less frustrating way, I'd rather spend my money there.
Have you ever shopped with Domain Authority? I jokingly tweeted about that a while ago, where I was like looking for, before COVID, I was looking for like a travel website or like a tourist company or something like that for vacation my wife and I were going on, and I literally used the one that had the highest domain authority. It's like,
I will tease the hell out of you for that. Yes. I mean, aren't those some of the most amazing sites, offerings, business, etc. is brand spanking new? I know some of the smartest people that I've come across haven't been doing it that long. They just have great, curious minds and new, fresh angles. So I definitely gave a lot of grief to domain authority and PageRank and all of that. So I like to poke fun at that sort of stuff. But longevity doesn't mean a lot these days, like just being around.
yeah.
God, I should not get extra gold stars for just sticking around this long.
Why not?
I don't know.
I think that's a good
I don't know.
Well,
Got to keep working for it. So that's a really interesting thing that I wish there was another way, like an easier way to measure that. But I guess that's what an algorithm does to me in a lot of ways. So you can go look at domain authority. You've got a list of those. To me, it's generally saying I trust a lot of what Google tosses at me in terms of being a decently relevant and high quality site. Always some curveballs. I always get a lot of flack from being a fan of Google, but they get me the information generally that I need to complete my task in a pretty fast and reliable way, which is similar to going looking at a site like a domain authority.
And speaking about trusting what Google throws at you, I'm just chuckling because John's watching in the chat, because I did have a question about, I think that a lot of SEOs are skeptical about how much to trust what people from Google say. Because I look at this list and I kind of am going, well, a lot of this stuff also benefits Google in many ways. Like make your site faster, that benefits them. Make it technically more sound, that benefits them. It makes it easier to crawl and get to your content. And I'm thinking, when I'm consulting with clients, I'm so focused, like you were saying, like you're focused on tech. I'm very focused on content and strategy, and Google Discover is one big thing that I'm focusing on this year, and just really good sound, like tried and true things like matching a page to the right intent of the search query and things like that. So do you think this list that I read is complete? Do you think there's other things that are important coming for SEO in 2021 that might not be on John's list that are technical, or just anything in general? And I guess just the more general question being, should we just take what Google says at blind faith, or should we maybe be questioning that? Your thoughts?
B, because it makes things more interesting, right? No, we shouldn't. We should take very few things in life at face value. It doesn't mean you have to approach them with a negativity or sense of pessimism, but we'd be losing a lot of that sense of curiosity if we just sort of agreed and marched toward a thing that some simple entity or single entity has said. I think it's really great to ask why. And I think it's really great to run tests. I think some of the most interesting tests that my team has done and the larger teams at DeepCrawl is to take something that is an assumed truth from Google, like something very simple, like you could just say, like, does PageRank actually pass if we have a no follow link?
Mm.
Like, what happens when I start stressing that symptom? What happens if I test it? Google's saying, well, we can only have this many lines of data in a sitemap, which was a lot more relevant before they expanded it to have these big beefy sitemaps. Well, can we push that? Can we run an automated test where we're adding URLs every single time and then seeing how often they're crawled, like seeing when they're crawled? So I generally trust the direction of Google. Maybe that could be a hugely wrong thing. They're definitely not perfect. There's a lot of shitheads there. There's a lot of bad policies, and they have their own employment issues right now.
Yeah.
Like, those are real things. However, I feel pretty solid about the direction, and then I can use that to spend my skeptical energy in really fun, clever ways.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to question right from the get-go. I want to say, all right, I see what you're doing there, but what if?
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. So Victor Pan has a question in the chat. Why is TBT recommended in lab environments for core web vitals? Ashley,
Here's Victor with just Throwback Thursday shit. I'm just kidding. Total blocking time. Throwback Thursday would be much better in Core Web Vitals. We could rock that one for sure. All of us that have been around for a long time. So I tried to answer this, but I may not have it right, because I think Victor's asking in lab environments versus field. If that's what he's asking, I think the total blocking time is probably more easily controlled and consistent and tested in lab versus field, versus the browser experience, because maybe there's just more stuff going on that way, but I'm not totally sure.
And can you explain the lab versus field environments? That's one thing I wanted to ask you as well. What are the differences?
Yeah. So in a lab environment, you're looking at something that's controlled with like these structured metrics. Field is really what's going on in the real world. So Chrome has, the ability to go and collect how people are experiencing your website. That's something like you and I can't really do.
Right.
So lab data is a lot easier to go in and pull, like, at a glance. Hey, here's what's happening right now when I hit your server in this very controlled way. Chrome is like, hey man, we just had 5,000 people hit this page. Let me average out what it really looked like to them.
Okay. And have you tried the Web Vitals extension?
So I do have it on, actually. And I am not an extension person, man. I'm a curmudgeon about putting anything on my browser, but I do have it on, and it's helped me find unicorns, as they say, because everyone's like, well, show me a site that's doing a really good job. Like, prove it to me, that thing. So it's helped me to find some better sites. However, I have found someone fact check me, but it doesn't always match up with what I'm able to get in other tools.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had a favorite tool, because you go to the web.dev/vitals tools, and they list like several of them. Do you have one that you kind of go to that you really like to use, other than what might be available in DeepCrawl?
I like to test sites one by one with Lighthouse and PageSpeed Insights. I know that it's a little cumbersome, but especially if you're looking at templates, you just get so much good data there.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so impressed at what they're able to give me. Like, give me all the data, what's going on with all my third-party scripts, how, like, telling me unused scripts, that's gold.
Yep.
Like, that's such a great way to be able to start making impact. So I do like those a lot. I do tend not to just look in the SERPs for stuff, so those kind of add-ons hold a little less value for me.
One of my favorite reports in DevTools is a way to get to, it will show you what percentage of the JavaScript is being used or not. And it's kind of like tricky to go and find, but I really love that one a lot, and show it to developers, and they kind of realize how much code they need to clean up. So we'll keep taking more questions. We've got about 15 or 17 minutes or so left in the live broadcast. I did want to talk a little bit about page experience overall. This has been another big thing from Google in the last year or so. My understanding is that page experience just kind of wraps together a bunch of UX signals that already sort of existed. So SSL, mobile friendly, interstitial, and coupling that with all of the core Web Vitals stuff, right? So like page experience is just a new sort of umbrella over all this existing stuff. Is that sort of your understanding of it as well?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
And is page experience, I'm like sort of embarrassed, I don't even know this. Is page experience an actual metric you can get? from Google, or is it just this sort of
Oh,
concept of like, hey, all these things need to be optimized?
not that I know of. I
Yeah.
think it's just a, hey, this is these things and our many metrics of things, these things go in this bucket and it's very important. Um, Again, I feel sheepish being the one and being on the call, especially with the team that I work with. Because, like I say, I like to surround myself with people smarter than me. So there might be some people correcting me, which is do it, do it, correct me.
Maybe
Share
John
some
will.
good resources that I'm not sharing. But I don't think there's any one single metric.
Maybe John will answer in the chat. So yeah, there's nothing really like my first reaction to it, because Google came out and sort of said, hey, this is a new ranking factor. But my first reaction to it was, well, hey, these are already things we've already been addressing for years in many cases, mobile friendly, SSL.
Yeah.
So to me, it was like, it doesn't really change a whole lot. I mean, maybe Core Web Vitals is a little bit new with those three metrics, but everything else to me on the UX side of things was already kind of out there already.
Yeah, those are already important factors. It'd be interesting to see how they're using them, though, right? So
Yeah.
maybe it's for different industry. One is weighted heavily, more heavily than the other. Sure, they have to have a number somewhere,
Mm.
but I always think like, is it responsible for us to have that data or not? Does it make us dig at the right things or the wrong things?
Yeah, it's a good
I
point.
don't know. I do love, like, I just want to say, like, shout out to actually giving us numerical values in the scale on stuff like page speed, because that is not the norm
Yeah.
as far as that level of data. And it is pretty awesome to work toward.
It's great to have metrics. So we are live. So if people want to ask more questions in the chat, definitely fire away. I wanted to chat a little bit about Google Discover. So this is something I've been helping sites with for like the last really almost years. When it kind of first popped on my radar, I remember I was working with a client and I was like clicked into Discover and I was like, what is this? And I saw they had literally 5 or 6 figures of traffic from Google Discover. And I had not clicked in, this was like
Yeah.
last February or something like that. And it completely blew my mind. And since then, I've really been focusing on Discover with clients that can benefit or are sort of eligible or can kind of get into Google Discover, because there really is this sort of like, it seems like an on-off switch almost, where like you're in Discover or you're not. But I just wanted to kind of share for the viewers some of my thoughts on Discover, because some people are talking about it, but I don't think a lot of people are really digging into it or really even know where to start when it comes to optimizing for it. So the first thing that I would recommend for anybody just curious about it before you try to take action is actually to set up, like, use Discover as a user. And the way I recommend doing this is to actually have a Google account where you've searched a lot of search queries in your industry or in your space,
Yeah.
because your feed is going to show you competitors and related topical things, that are. I've actually done this for a lot of clients, and it puts a lot of things on my radar, like for content topic ideas or like strategies and stuff like that. So that's number one. Like I see so many people talking about, oh, I don't even know what Discover is or what to do about it, but they've never even used it, right? So just download the Google app on iOS or Android and start using it. But there's been a few like myths about it. And I think this is one of the things that has prevented people from maybe dipping their toe into the water and trying it. First of all, like I mentioned, I've seen some sites getting like 6 figures of traffic a month or every 3 months from Discover. Even e-commerce sites, right? So this is not related to just, news or something like that. This is really broadening out to a lot of other types of websites. The second thing is that it's not just timely content. Like if you go into Discover as a user, you will
Yeah.
see, and it'll say from 12 months ago or from last year. And those things are always based upon a search query that I performed within the last couple of days. So if I'm searching around about like the best customer management software or something like that, 2 days later in Discover, I'll see like a guide to customer management software.
Yeah.
And so you'll start to pick up these patterns between your search queries and then what Discover is serving you. And like I said, it's not just evergreen. And the other thing too, a lot of people still don't realize is it's not just always a spike of traffic and goes away like the news. I've had some clients getting steady evergreen traffic for like literally 6 months or 9 months from Discover,
That's
which
good.
is another, I think, paradigm shift a lot of people don't really understand about Discover. And the other thing too about it is it's not just news content. I've actually seen a lot of, like I said, guides or informational content, but even some mid-funnel and close to low-funnel buyer's guide types of content getting
We've
traffic in
had sites
Discover.
have e-com sites have product pages show.
Yeah. I've
Not
had
as
some,
often, but that's kind
yeah,
of fun.
I've had some ecom clients create like a buyer's guide to their product or their product category, and those have shown up in Discover. And you can imagine and they've actually converted from that. Like they've generated revenue. So that's, I think, some mindset changes I think people should make about Discover. And then after you get that and browse as a user, and then you're starting to look for topics and seeing what other people are doing to give you ideas. There's actually some strategies that I think kind of work with Discover. One, like I said, is to post things that the beauty about Discover is it's not dependent upon a specific search query or keyword, which is really cool because in regular SEO, you have to target an actual keyword that aligns to your content. And you have to be able to rank for that. But with Google Discover, you can write something about just a general topic and it will show in Discover because it's queryless, right? There's no keywords. So that's a really great way to do it's like YouTube views in a way. When you're recommended, that's not based upon a search query, that's based upon a topical interest.
It's irrelevant, yeah.
Yeah, which is a really great extra way to drive traffic that's not dependent upon ranking for a search query. Once people are starting to show up in Discover, they should optimize their images. So I've noticed and optimizing for speed is one thing, but compositionally speaking, having a really nice image with like a central object as the focal point, maybe the background is blurred or the background is solid. If you think about a really good performing YouTube thumbnail image-wise, what works really well in Google Discover because it's all about click-through rate. And so as you start showing up in Discover, you go into Search Console, look at all the pages that are ranking and sort by click-through rate and look for the ones that are not performing well and update your images and update your titles. And on the flip side, look at the ones that are performing well and repeat those image compositions or title formats on other pieces of content. And I know I've been talking a lot, but as you can see, I'm like really excited about this Discover stuff because I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Another effective tactic that I've seen work well is to go back to old content and update it. And I've seen that actually make that content reappear or appear for the first time in Google Discover. And then another thing I've seen actually work is add a new internal link from a new piece of content back to the old piece of content. And that old piece of content will show up in Discover as well. So
are you rewriting, are you updating content that's already performing well?
Yeah.
Or are you updating? So have you seen any risks with that? So if you go fiddle with a page that's already killing it, have you seen any negative?
No, not necessarily. So that's a really good question because that gets into like, are you updating content against a search query or for only Discover? So if you go back and update old content that's not ranking to begin with, there's no risk at all, right? Because you're not going to mess it up. But if you're going to go back and update old content that has been ranking for stuff, you want to update in a way that's your primary goal is update it as if you would update it to try to improve its rankings. So update it against the search query performance first as your first goal. That update as a byproduct might help surface it in Google Discover.
Right. Yeah, I think I oversimplify. I love getting into the tech part of websites. So I think I sometimes oversimplify the content part of like, just make it great. just do lovely things with content. I have, as a consumer only, like been a little frustrated sometimes with the simplicity of Google Discover. So I'm very much looking forward to how it evolves and because I feel like what it's done is it's found like the 5 things I've looked up, and it's like, maybe I looked up an article about COVID safe karate for my kid one time.
Yep.
She needs to focus her braking energy somewhere.
Yeah.
And now I get served 7 things per day on martial arts. Like that can be excessive. Now for a website owner, that's actually kind of a cool opportunity.
Yeah.
But I want to see how that changes and how Google handles those nuances. Because now I'm always like, God damn it, Google, one time. Yeah. It's not my hobby. Like it's just, it's too much. So I'm curious. But now, when anything's new like this, and there's some clear ways to make big impact, like this is the best way to get people in there and to see what works.
Yeah. And even if you're not in Discover, like I said, when you have your account, look at what your competitors are showing up for in Discover and do similar things. And one last strategy I'll mention too is I've had clients. So in traditional search, the entire idea is don't cannibalize your content, right? Like
Yeah.
don't post repetitive pieces of content about the same topic or too closely aligned to the same keyword because they'll cannibalize one another. Well, Discover flips that on its head because I've had some sites purposefully publish multiple pieces of content on the same topic in slightly nuanced ways, right? So they're not totally cannibalizing, but something that you probably wouldn't do just for traditional search. And all 4 times they do that, they show up in Google Discover. So the idea there is you're repeating what's working in Discover topic-wise. And every time they showed up, they got a massive, I'm talking a traffic spike of 5 figures. By just
Awesome.
repeating, covering kind of the same topic. Then the paradigm here is because you're going against traditional SEO to work in your strategy even more aggressive content auditing and content cleanup and consolidation. So I think overall, the way publishers should be thinking about strategy moving forward is even if you're an e-commerce site, think like you're a news company a little bit. Publish things maybe a little bit more frequently around the same topic, but then have a process where you're going back and updating later. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like the add one, take away two. There's always something we can clean up.
Yeah.
So,
And I see a couple, last question or two, because we were about to wrap up here in a few minutes. So Victor Pan says, for page experience, should we be thinking about passing the interstitials test via legacy ad experience report in Google Search Console? And
is that still supported? Is that, well, supported, or is it being looked after and updated in the tool? I don't know. So, I haven't used it in 9 million years.
Yeah, so the ad experience report in Google Search Console. So the way I check interstitials is with, one way anyways, is with mobile friendly test. And I just look for it to show up in the rendering. I know that's not always the best way or the most definite way, but that's where I look for interstitial issues or pop-up issues.
Yeah. So I had a question too, is just that at what point is a delay acceptable? Because you'll get sites that'll hit that 1.5 or 3 seconds. At what point is it not an interstitial?
Yeah. So with the pop-up, I've tested this. Don't tell John.
Okay.
Sure he's still listening. So, I kind of think of the interstitial and mobile pop-up penalty a little similarly, right? It's just covering content when you load it. So I had actually had Frontline at PBS test this, and they figured out 7.5 seconds was.
Whoa.
Yeah. And then that's the time it took for it to not show up in the rendering. So yeah, I kind of went, okay, that might be, I don't know if they're still doing that, but I sort of thought that might be the amount of delay time needed.
Do you have another question, or can we do a quick rapid fire fun quiz between the two of us?
Because I found fun. Do you mean the one I was talking about earlier?
Yeah. Can I start? I'm so excited.
Oh, you are? Okay, good. So let me explain to the viewer. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but stick around because you can all participate in this little fun quiz idea that I had that Ashley and I are going to do. We're going to pull up old articles from Search Engine Roundtable. So we're going to go into the Google Update category, and Ashley's going to do this first, and you're going to find a random title from an old Search Engine Roundtable post, and you're going to read me that title and only that title. And then in the chat, the viewers and myself, we're going to try to guess the year that headline is from. And if it's all interesting, we'll chat a little bit about like maybe if it's still significant or whatever. So you've got a good one, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to maybe rapid fire one for you. Are you ready for the first one?
I'm ready.
Here's the headline. Google Cricket update this weekend. Tell me the year.
Google Cricket. I think that's before my time in SEO, to be honest.
When did you join SEO?
2010 or so is when I really started.
Wrong.
Yeah. Well, no, that's not my guess. That's when I started in SEO.
Well, I know, but it's after that is what I'm saying. Like
the Cricket update is after 2010?
It says Cricket. I don't know who makes this shit up, these names. Barry, I love you. It was from June 2015 that the Cricket update was mentioned.
That has totally just gone out of my brain. What was does it say what the Cricket update was?
Having me click on some stuff.
And I've got one for you when.
I mean, this just says that there's not an update.
John says WTF.
this is where Barry can chime in and see
Yeah.
if he remembers it. So
Spinal Cord said 2014. You were pretty close there. Victor said 2021.
Victor, we don't name those anymore. Silly animals. Not unless we're doing a possum update or something. Some kind of trash animal would be ideal.
Do you have some
All right,
details on?
do you have one for me?
I do, but do you know what the cricket update was, or we're past it?
No,
Okay.
no clue, man. I'm not reading the whole article on it. I'm sorry.
Okay. So
But
the
I
headline.
did say we can set Barry up and he can tell us the answer.
All right. So the headline is, and again, you can guess in the chat. Google not launching Penguin 4.0 this year, 14 plus months since refresh.
I'm bad at all these. 2018?
2015.
Damn it.
So, if for anyone paying attention to Penguin stuff or link penalties, I mean, I vaguely remember this, but there was this period of time where they didn't refresh Penguin for over 14 months, which was like a really. Remember the days of Penguin when there was like they had to refresh it? Now it's just like I believe it's worked into the core algorithm, right? It's like
Yeah.
just always running type of thing. But I remember that it was like there were sites waiting and waiting and waiting that had Penguin penalties that could do nothing about it to see recovery for well over a year.
Makes sense. I have another one.
Okay, let's go.
82% say we should name some Google updates.
2018.
No.
Because my thought process there was that wasn't that around when Google started just saying they started pre-announcing updates but just calling them the core updates. I think it was 2018.
So it was actually before we started getting all the ridiculous names. So this was 2009.
Oh wow. Okay, so that's I don't know if that was fair. You chose one before my time. I told you it was 2010.
You can't let me know your liabilities because I will take advantage of them.
All right, since you do one more, let me find one more, and then we'll wrap things up. And again, if anybody's still hanging around in the chat, 2000, John said Fred. Okay, all right. Let's
No.
maybe we'll do this next time, but we'll like actually keep score, and or we'll give a prize to somebody in the crowd because I'm gonna get a little competitive now since you pulled one out from 2009. All right, let's see. Okay, here we go. Google Update sends more pages back into supplemental index.
2016?
No.
I have no clue.
I feel like I win. That was 2006.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Well, here's the deal. I'm not actually a professional and I should be fired, but I appreciate you and everyone who came to listen to us banter for an hour. I will help recommend a more qualified search individual. Let's get Barry on here and quiz him on some of his own headlines.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. I'm just trying to figure out what is it Google sent.
Oh, look, Spinal Cord had a good point. Got to know your history, otherwise it repeats itself.
Yeah,
Excellent
true.
point.
Yeah.
Poignant about where America is.
So we're going to wrap up, but just real quick, one reason I wanted to bring you onto the Q&A just to give you a chance to tell people real quick about United Search. Like, I really, really believe in this. So just in like your 30-second elevator pitch, what is United Search and how can people check it out?
You got it. Super simple idea. We just want to help get more diverse representation on stage. So most SEO conferences have a lot of the same people. They're brilliant people. They're great. I love a lot of them. However, we need some fresh ideas and some fresh folks, and it's going to take some actual intentional motivation and purposeful mentoring. So we're pairing mentors and mentees. So if you apply as a mentee, you're going to get paired with someone who speaks a lot in the industry. And the idea is they just help you with your pitch, help you reform a presentation. We help you get on stage. We just wrapped up all of our applications for the first phase. It's going to be February, March. So this week, we're actually working on pairing mentees with mentors and letting everyone know if they made the first wave or what they can do differently. I will say, appreciate all the graciousness because it's tough. Like there's a lot of moving parts and this is a nonprofit, but that's it.
I love it. So people can go to unitedsearch.org, right? Check that out.
Correct.
Awesome.
Or reach out to me on Twitter or at the United Search Twitter handle, which is Search United, I think. I don't know. But yes, find us. Find me. I'll help you.
Cool. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining. And we had 57 playbacks live. That's awesome. Okay. We'll see everyone next time.
Have a good one.
End stream.